Jonas Hale was not a man prone to conscience-stricken nightmares, nor was he a superstitious soul. He was a rugged fellow, a bit proud of his self-reliance, who earned his life's keep traversing the hidden nooks and crannies of the Appalachian Mountains to gather folk tales and bits of lore. Local legends entranced him, giving him the sense that he was doing more than collecting ghost stories. He was preserving living history, a tapestry of songs, beliefs, and half-forgotten myths woven through generations. Still, he found himself uneasy one brisk autumn evening as he made the winding drive to Old Crow Gap, a backwoods settlement perched in the shadows of the Blue Ridge Peaks. Word had reached him of an unusual Appalachian ghost story, a spectral fiddler said to roam the ridges, whose uncanny melodies could stir the very spirits of the mountains. Upon arriving in Old Crow Gap, Jonas discovered the place nearly deserted at twilight. There were only a few cabin lights flickering in the distance, while an unsettling swirl of fog clung to the valleys. He checked into a small boarding house run by a weary widow named Nettie Collins, who had a haunted look about her. When Jonas mentioned his interest in collecting local folklore, Nettie's quivering hands betrayed a mix of fear and reverence. She asked him if he'd come for the fiddler. Jonas nodded, feeling that familiar thrill tug at his curiosity. "There was a fiddler named Lonnie McPherson," she said at last. Her voice was barely a whisper, escaping like a secret she regretted sharing. He was known all across these mountains. Folks claimed he could make the pine trees dance. Then, one night, he just disappeared, or so the old folks said. Some believe he died in a landslide. Others swear he bargained away his soul. Now they say he wanders these ridges, drawn by the moonlight, playing a song that can stir the old mountain's spirits. Her words left Jonas with a chill. He had heard variations of fiddler folklore before. Devilish deals, lost ghosts, heartbreak turned to haunting tunes. But nothing about resurrecting ancient spirits. That was new, especially to the scholarly side of Jonas's mind. The next day, he hiked into the nearby hollers, looking for people willing to share more details. The few men he found chopping wood or mending fences gave cryptic warnings. Most of the older women refused to say anything at all. Finally, in an overgrown cemetery with tilted headstones and vines creeping over worn inscriptions, Jonas stumbled upon a caretaker who recognized the name McPherson. "Lonnie McPherson's in this ground," the caretaker said, a lanky figure named Emery who, with a few swigs of homemade liquor, loosened his tongue. But whether he rests or not is plain uncertain. He was a local prodigy in his youth, folks say, grew to be a travelling musician, fiddling at barn dances and gatherings from one end of these hills to the other. His music was haunting, sweet, and sorrowful all at once. Some believed he learned a sacred tune that came from the original guardians of these mountains, ancient spirits that lived long before settlers cut down forests and built roads. He was rumoured to slip off at midnight to practice in hidden glens, calling up voices from the shadows. Jonas listened carefully to Emery's account. He learned that the older folks whispered of Lonnie's final performance. The night he supposedly vanished, the story went that a violent storm raged across the ridges. Lonnie, unafraid, started playing his fiddle on a moonlit outcrop. The lightning-flashed sky revealed a line of spectres drifting in the wind, pulled to the mesmerizing music. Then Lonnie disappeared, along with the ghostly assembly. Only the lingering echoes of his tune remained, bouncing off the stony cliffs until dawn. Over the years, travellers and locals alike claimed to hear that same fiddling echo in the hollows on certain nights, always under a bright moon, always luring lost souls into hidden corners of the forest. Jonas's mind whirled with possibilities. As he studied these tales, he saw an undercurrent of something older than the earliest Appalachian settlers. He recalled hearing about the Cherokee beliefs and an array of legends that predated the Scots-Irish ballads. It's the same primal forces existed here, awakened by McPherson's music. The caretaker's mention of ancient mountain guardians ignited Jonas's imagination. He spent the following days combing through dusty records in the small local library, cross-referencing property deeds and birth ledgers. Indeed, he found a Lonnie Macpherson, born 1843, died 1876. But the death record was suspiciously informal. There was no mention of how he died, only that he had gone missing and was presumed deceased. The official cause was never established. A few hand-scrawled notes in the margin indicated that some believed he'd been carried off by ghouls, while others insisted he left the region under a dark cloud. None explained how the fiddler's name still reverberated through the hollows over a century later. That night, Jonas took a solitary stroll along the ridge, hoping for inspiration or perhaps another worldly encounter. The wind sifted through the oak and sugar maple branches, releasing the aroma of decaying leaves. The fullness of the moon lent an ethereal glow to the rocky path. All was still, except for the occasional rustle of wildlife. But then a thin strain of music drifted on the night breeze, so faint that Jonas first thought it was his imagination. He paused, straining his ears. The melody was haunting, yet strangely inviting, punctuated by fleeting harmonies that hinted at heartbreak and longing. A cold tingle scraped along his spine. Could it possibly be the famed Spectral fiddler? Jonas followed the tune deeper into the forest, deeper into shadows. As it grew more distinct, he realized the fiddling was unlike any he had ever heard, full of shifting intervals and eerie chord changes that defied his musical knowledge. He soon reached a small clearing where a figure stood, cloaked in moonlight. The silhouette held a fiddle to its shoulder. Pale fog swirled around weathered boots that barely seemed to touch the ground. Something about the figure's stance suggested both a man and a wistful apparition. The fiddler turned his head slightly, as though aware of Jonas's presence, but never ceased his mesmerizing music. Jonas felt as if invisible tendrils of the tune were reaching through the air, curling around him. Strangely, he wanted to approach, to hear every note, to unravel the secrets behind the chords. He took tentative steps forward, heart hammering. The fiddler's face was partially obscured by the brim of a battered hat. Though luminous, it looked ancient, cheekbones hollow, eyes shadowed by sorrow. Then, just as Jonas thought to call out, the music turned from lonely lament to a triumphant cry, and the clearing itself seemed to awaken. The moonlight brightened. Fog thickened to a near-palpable border. Dark shapes, like wavering silhouettes, rose from the leaf-strewn ground. Jonas watched in awe as they took on delicate, almost human outlines. A woman's face seemed to hover, hair swirling in unseen currents of night air. A tall, antlered figure materialized next to her, part human but crowned with a stag's head. The flickering forms held a primal power, neither fully horrific nor wholly welcoming. They felt like the very soul of the mountains. Though his knees shook, Jonas leaned closer, enthralled by the spectacle. The fiddler seemed oblivious to fear, or perhaps he was commanding these shapes. With every bowstroke, the shapes danced around the clearing, swirling and bending to the melody, caught in some ancient ritual. To Jonas, it looked as though centuries of stories, long-forgotten spirits of the land, were returning to life. The fiddler drew out a final chord that echoed for an impossibly long moment. Then, with a graceful sweep, he lowered his arm. The dance of shadows abruptly stilled. One by one, they melted into the moonlight until only the fiddler remained. Who are you?" Jonas managed to croak. A hush followed for several seconds. Then the fiddler raised his face, and beneath the spectral glow, Jonas glimpsed eyes that looked sorrowful, yet filled with quiet determination. "I was Lonnie Macpherson, once," the fiddler said in a voice that sounded distant and unmoored from time. "Now I remain bound to these mountains by a debt that must be paid." Jonas found himself unable to speak. The fiddler, still half in darkness, loosely shook his bow. "I cannot rest, nor can this land fully heal. he went on. The spirits I summon, they are part of this place. They were betrayed, driven away from their home, their sanctuaries defiled. I can call them back only in glimpses, in fragments. They yearn to return, but they are wounded by the disregard of generations. The solitude, the sorrow you hear in my music belongs not just to me, but to the land. Do you know that weight, stranger? Jonas let out a breath. I think I do, in a way, he replied. The world's changed so much. It's lost the old stories, the old truths. The fiddler nodded, his battered hat bobbing gently. And so I play, night after night, certain that I must find a living soul willing to do more than just listen. One who will stand witness to what once was, so that these mountains can truly be reborn. Inexplicably, Jonas felt tears welling. It was as though the land itself wept through the fiddler's voice, summoning longing that Jonas had never realized dwelled within him. He reached out a trembling hand, wanting to ask more, but the figure shook his head and began to fade. Then, in the whisper of a breeze, the fiddler was gone, leaving Jonas alone in the clearing. The hush of the forest returned like a weight on Jonas's chest, pregnant with some nameless mourning. For a moment, he thought he heard the faintest echo of fiddling drifting away down the slope. The following days passed in a dreamlike haze. Jonas found himself haunted by the memory of the midnight gathering. If Lonnie Macpherson truly existed in spirit form, if he was truly bound to these hills, then the old tales were more than just stories. Each evening, Jonas took to wandering alone, hoping the fiddler might appear again. But for a while, the ridges offered no more than their usual rustles and calls of night creatures. Driven by a strange compulsion, Jonas visited a Cherokee elder named Tali in a neighboring valley. Through the years, Tali offered glimpses of her people's traditions to outsiders, though warily. She sat behind her cabin with a sharp wind tangling her silver hair. As Jonas recounted his experience, she closed her eyes, listening quietly. There are old guardians in these mountains, she finally said, spirits of the land that once watched over all who lived here. We had names for them before the newcomers arrived. Some took the form of animals, some took the form of sacred dancers. They were part of the living world. But the tragedies visited upon this place, displacement of the people, destruction of forests, caused these spirits to retreat. Some may have chosen to anchor themselves to individuals, shamans, prophets, or perhaps even a musician. If Lonnie Macpherson did indeed learn one of our oldest songs, it might have connected him to these spirits beyond death. Tali's gestures were slow and deliberate as she sipped steaming tea. If you've been called by him, Jonas, she said, perhaps you have some role to play in easing the spirit's burden. You must be careful, though, for powerful energies lie within the old songs, and certain things, once awakened, do not rest easily. Her words lingered in Jonas's mind. He felt both excited by his brush with the supernatural and daunted by the responsibility it implied. If Lonnie Macpherson was searching for validation, an ally, then Jonas wanted to be that person. And yet, how did one help resurrect mountain spirits? One evening near dusk, Jonas ventured back to the clearing. Settling upon a log, he waited, the hush of twilight unfolding around him. Silver moonbeams gradually filtered through the tall pines, and the night air turned cold. He sat there hours, resisting the urge to give up. Then, well past midnight, the bowing of a spectral fiddle drifted to his ears. The fiddler materialized on the far side of the clearing, bathed in a faint luminescence. Jonas approached more confidently this time. The spectral musician's face was half hidden under the brim of his old hat, yet Jonas felt a sense of relief, like greeting a friend. Lonnie's voice, low and echoing, reached him almost before the fiddling stopped. "You came back," he murmured. "I need to know how to help," Jonas replied. The wind sighed through the trees. The fiddler touched his bow to the fiddle strings, letting a subdued note hum in the stillness. "You heard the tune I played last time. Inside it lies an invitation to the ancestral guardians, but the tune is incomplete. I died before I learned its full repercussion, the final chords that would allow them to return in their rightful form. Only the living can unearth that last passage and finish what I started. Jonas swallowed, his pulse thumping against his eardrums. Where can I learn the rest? Lonnie's sad gaze seemed to burn into him. Toward the northern ridge stands a hidden cavern. In the days of my youth, an old hermit taught me half the tune. He sent me to the cavern to discover the rest. That was the night the storm took me, and I never reached its heart. That final chord remains lost in the darkness. He paused. Go there, and if you are worthy, the mountain may reveal its secret. But tread carefully, for some powers do not give their knowledge freely. Jonas spent the next day preparing. He loaded provisions in a sturdy backpack and set off downhill across mossy creek beds and up steep inclines. He followed rutted game trails past waterfalls cascading into hidden pools. Over the years he had grown adept at reading the terrain, though the mountains had a way of veiling their most secret spaces. Eventually, he entered a remote hollow where the forest grew denser. The trunks of ancient hemlocks stood like silent sentinels, layered with centuries of moss. Twisting parted branches revealed a realm that felt untouched by time. There, behind a cluster of massive boulders, Jonas spotted the dark mouth of a cavern. Even from the threshold, he felt an unearthly chill exuding from it. Inside, the air was damp and tinged with an earthy musk. Water dripped from stalactites, echoing in the gloom. He clicked on his flashlight, illuminating a pathway that snaked into the depths. Aware that the Spectral fiddler's instructions suggested something more than physical exploration, Jonas also opened his senses, listening for intangible signs. The drip of water slowly formed a kind of pattern, reminiscent of a faint melodic cadence. Another few steps in, he heard what sounded like a hushed chord, a chord that set his nerves on edge. An anxious flutter tugged at him. Should he turn back? Focus, he whispered. He pressed onward. The tunnel twisted, and he ducked low, mindful of jagged rock outcrops. He remembered Lonnie's caution. The knowledge would not be given freely. Shadows rippled in the corners of his vision. A mild tremor vibrated through the stones beneath his feet, as though the mountain had a heartbeat. He continued, drawn by an indescribable sense that something waited ahead. Finally, he arrived at a wide chamber. The flashlight revealed a floor strewn with small bones, animal remains from countless years, and, on the far side, cryptic markings etched into the walls. The designs depicted figures dancing in a ring, swirling lines that might represent wind or spirit. Faint traces of pigment clung to the carvings, suggesting an ancient, powerful art. Jonas's breath hitched as he recognized a man holding a fiddle. Even carved in simplistic lines, the figure had the same posture, the same stance, as Lonnie McPherson. Above him were additional shapes, half human, half animal, suggesting the guardians he had seen in the clearing. Compelled by something within his chest, Jonas set down the flashlight and carefully touched the carvings. Like a gust of wind, a ripple of energy rushed through his fingers. In an instant, his mind flashed with images. Roiling storms, swirling leaves, the hush of snow-blanketed peaks, the cries of ravens, the slow, steady reverberation of an ancient drum. He felt a sensation like music pouring into him. His heart pounded wildly, and he struggled to keep his balance. It was as though the mountain itself was speaking, whispering the final chord that the fiddler had never learned. Without knowing how, Jonas suddenly understood. It was not just a melody of notes, but a chord of unity, a combination of rhythms that encompassed the full spectrum of the land's heartbeat. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes. It was sorrow, but also renewal. It was the mourning of lost guardians and the hope of regeneration. As the sensation receded, Jonas sank to his knees, trembling. "I hear you," he murmured to the silence. "I will carry it." He emerged from the cavern in the early evening, the sun dipping behind the peaks. Though exhaustion clung to every fiber of his being, Jonas felt an underlying strength, as if the land itself was supporting him. He made his way back to Old Crow Gap beneath a waxing moon. Once darkness fully claimed the sky, he noted the old roads and earthen trails illuminated by a faint, otherworldly glow. As though the mountain recognized him, the shadows no longer concealed him. They guided him. Near midnight, Jonas arrived at the clearing once more. There he found the spectral fiddler waiting, bow poised. Lonnie's glowing features were lined with yearning. "You went to the cavern," he said. Jonas nodded solemnly. "I've found it," Jonas breathed, placing his hand over his heart as though the melody were inscribed there. "The chord, it's part of the land, part of all living things. I feel it now." Lonnie's gaze brimmed with gratitude. He raised his fiddle and drew the bow gently, beginning the tune Jonas had heard before. This time, something was different. When Lonnie reached the place where the melody used to halt, Jonas exhaled and, without a fiddle, offered the chord in a wordless hum. It emerged from him like a vibration, resonating with the flicker of moonlit air. The spirit fiddler's bow danced across the strings, weaving Jonas's voice into the arrangement. The effect was immediate. The clearing shimmered in silver luminescence, dissolving the veil of reality. Once again, spectral shapes arose from the ground. The woman with swirling hair, the antlered figure, and more besides. Creatures of impossible form emerged, some part bird, some gliding like serpents, all silent as the wind. They drew closer, forming a spectral circle around Jonas and Lonnie. Their eyes, whether human, animal, or something in between, glowed with ancient emotion. Relief, longing, sorrow, joy. Together they danced to the music, and the entire forest pulsated with it. Jonas closed his eyes as the chord soared higher, unspooling generations of pain and separation. He felt the pang of lost lands, of stolen traditions, of a broken covenant between humans and the natural world. Yet within this chord he also felt a promise of restoration. As the final note reached crescendo, the dancing spirits converged in a silent, luminous wave, merging with Jonas's voice. A fiery warmth spread through his chest. Tears streamed down. Without words, he understood. He was a vessel for their return, and they were bestowing upon him a blessing that transcended death. With a flourish, Lonnie brought the bow to a gentle rest on the fiddle, ending the melody. Silence fell, but the resonance lingered in Jonas's ears, echoing across the valleys. The moonlight revealed that the spectres had not vanished, but were no longer mere shadows. Their forms seemed stronger, more tangible. Some cracked sad smiles. Others turned skyward, as though breathing the mountain air for the first time in eons. A hush spread through the clearing as the luminous beings floated backward into the forest, slowly dispersing among the trees. Jonas watched them go, heart pounding with an indescribable mixture of triumph and melancholy. He knew many of these spirits, newly restored, might eventually fade back into hidden realms, but they would do so with renewed vigor. A sacred connection had been reforged. Then Jonas turned to the fiddler. Lonnie's form appeared steadier, less transparent. "Thank you," Lonnie said. "I have been trapped in sorrow for so long, trying with all my strength to mend what was broken. Perhaps now the rift between these mountains and their keepers can begin to close. It will take time, understanding, maybe even generations. But a thread has been reconnected." He lowered the fiddle. "You did what I couldn't." Jonas grasped Lonnie's hand, stunned to find it tangible. "You gave me the key," he said softly. "I only carried it the last step." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Lonnie's mouth, an expression filled with relief. His form began to glow more brightly, as though lifted by the very chord they had played. "I feel the peace I've long sought," he murmured, "and now I may finally rest." His form flickered one last time. "Walk gently, friend. These mountains know you now, and they will call you if ever they need you again." With that, his shimmering shape dissolved, scattering like dust in moonbeams. Jonas stood there, a strange emptiness pulling at the space around him. He realized he might never again see Lonnie Macpherson's ghost, but in his heart the fiddler's music remained. Night winds sighed through the pines, carrying a sense of solace. The old guardians, too, would live on in hidden glens and hollers. Their presence was no longer exiled. Their bond with the land had been strengthened. Jonas lingered in that clearing until dawn's first glow. Words felt inadequate to describe the sense of awe coursing through him, the hume that still resonated in his bones. Eventually, he gathered himself and made his way back to Old Crow Gap. When he arrived, townsfolk remarked on the glow in his eyes, some smiling knowingly, others stepping back in superstitious alarm. Nettie Collins stared at him as he returned to the boarding house, a question on her lips that she never voiced. Something about his bearing told her an extraordinary event had taken place. In the days that followed, Jonas wrote down every note of the chord he had experienced, though he suspected the true power of that melody could never fully be captured on paper. He spoke with Tali again, who listened with quiet satisfaction, and then placed her hand upon his head briefly, as if in blessing. Even Emery, the old caretaker, mulled over Jonas's account, shook his head in amazement, and concluded that perhaps the old legends were more real than any sensible man would dare admit. Jonas knew he would someday leave the mountains, as was the nature of his itinerant lifestyle. But the land had branded him, and he felt certain he would always be bound to return. There were other lost stories out there, other restless spirits. He realized that the Appalachian Mountains were not merely a range of jagged ridges. They were alive, ancient, and still whispering if one cared to listen. And as for Lonnie Macpherson, though the spectral fiddler would not appear again in the hollers, Jonas believed his brightest legacy remained. Every once in a while, on moonlit nights when Jonas walked a lonely trail, he would hear a faint echo of supernal music gliding in the wind, one final reminder of the ghostly fiddler who loved his mountain home enough to become part of its soul. Jonas would pause, closing his eyes, letting the echo guide his heart. He would sense, in that moment, that the ancient guardians were stirring, awakened from slumber to roam the ridges once more. It was a testament that the music of the mountains, woven from sorrow and hope, could indeed transcend death and usher in a new dawn.